Greetings, mortals, and welcome to Mathamancy 101. I'm going to try to briefly explain how to avoid just really nasty RNG in Europa Universalis, and it will talk a bit about the way that the actual combat mechanics work. I won't really be explaining any of this stuff because none of this stuff involves RNG, so I'm just going to be talking about pips and the roles for combat and how they influence things. So, first things first, when you roll in combat, you are rolling a number between 0 and 9. That roll is then modified by +3 by default, and that gives you your base casualties. So your base casualties of 3 is then multiplied by 5, and then multiplied by a bunch of other stats, by your morale to determine morale damage, by your discipline to determine discipline damage, by enemies, a lot of things. Okay, but the baseline damage is sort of like a base that is increased or decreased by adding or subtracting pips from it. So, as an example, the Reformed Galilei infantry have a +2 to offensive shock. So when they roll in the shock phase for damage, they get a +2 there. So if they roll a 0, they have instead a 2 overall. You add the 3 base to that, and so you have 5. Simple enough. Landschnecken get that +1, etc. The defensive pips subtract from those values. So, and for the enemy, obviously. So if Reformed Galilei infantry are fighting against Landschnecken infantry, both will have a +1 against each other. So these guys will have a +1 to their rolls because they have 2 offensive shock, which is subtracted by the 1 defensive shock of their enemy, and the Landschnecken have 1 offensive shock that's subtracted by 0. Simple enough. So that's how these stats influence the roll. Relatively simple. Then you have leaders. So leaders are similarly simple. It's just whichever one has the higher value has their roll increased for that phase by the difference between them. So as an example, Jaquez in the fire phase has 3 higher skill than Gui, so he'll get a +3 to all rolls in that phase. So let's say that we've got Reformed Galilei infantry fighting against Landschnecken. With that leader, what we're looking for is, well, nothing, because that's actually the fire phase. Ignore what I'm saying there. So they have no bonus from those, so everyone just gets a +3 for that phase on his side, and these guys don't get anything. They don't get any bonus whatsoever. They also don't get a penalty. That's important to remember. These guys get a bonus, these guys get nothing. Then we go over to the shock phase, and here's where things get interesting. If Gui is fighting, then he gets +4 to his shock value, plus another 2 offensive shock from the Reformed Galilei infantry. Okay? Or, I guess if we're fighting Landschnecken versus Reformed, which we can just go ahead and assume, we're just going to say there's a +1 in addition. So he's getting +5 to his rolls, and Jaquez is getting +1 for his infantry at any rate, because that's the number of pips that they have. Okay, so those rolls are then modified by that, and all is right with the world. Now, the third thing that can influence the rolls is the thing that can really screw you, and that is terrain. Now, if you have very highly skilled leaders, you don't really have to worry too much about terrain because they're going to be giving you bonuses that nullify the terrain penalties. But terrain penalties are very tricky because of the fact that they decrease directly from the baseline value. So normally the minimum number of casualties that you can inflict is 3 times the multipliers, right? So 3 times the multipliers versus 12 times the multipliers isn't that huge a difference. Okay, it is. It's a quadruple if you roll a 9 versus a 3 baseline. So, and that's big. But if you start decreasing the you start decreasing the base value, it gets very, very bad very, very quickly. So if you have a -1, so let's say you're just attacking by crossing a river, you don't have any bonus, the opponent has no bonus, but he rolls a 9, you roll a 0. That guy is now dealing 6 times the damage that you are dealing. If you drop your penalty to -2, so let's say you're in mountains, you're fighting into mountains, you're attacking someone in the mountains, you have a -2. And you roll a 0. If you roll that 0, you have a 1 and the other guy has a 12. So all of a sudden, that -1 has doubled the difference in damage between your troops and their troops. You're going from 6 times as much damage to 12 times as much damage. If you then subtract it by another one, because you're stupid enough to attack across a river and into mountains, your base casualties reduced to 0, and while you still do inflict some casualties, it is an infinitesimally small number. So you start dealing, let's say you have an army of, a few thousand fighting against each other, you're going to be dealing single-digit casualties. Single-digit. As in, you're going to kill 7 troops in a day. They're going to be killing triple-digit casualties on any roll, and if they're rolling 9s, they might be getting, 4-digit. You don't get single-digit roll, modifiers except for that. It's such a tiny amount that you're basically just having your army die horribly, and their army is just crushing you. So if you roll 0s multiple times in a row, and you're fighting into negative terrain, it doesn't matter how strong your army is, you're still going to lose. You cannot win, no matter whatever your bonuses are, if you can't kill enemy troops. So when you start getting into the -3, -4 penalties, that's one of the big things that people misunderstand about this game, is that those penalties are dropping your base. So if you are looking at a -4 penalty, and you roll a 1, rolling a 1 or rolling a 0, you have a 1 in 5 chance of doing absolutely nothing every single round if you have a -4 penalty. So don't ever get penalties. If you get penalties and you lose the fight, that is not RNG, that is you. Because you were stupid enough to attack when you had penalties. Because those penalties are more important than the bonuses are. If you have a +6 general versus a +0 general, that is not as important as a -4 versus a neutral. It's just not. Because the -4 is so much more important than a +6 is. So if you have a +6 versus a 0, let's assume that, both, the maximal difference is like a 3 versus, 18? 3 versus an 18. 3 versus 18 is 6 times the damage. When you're looking at that -4, you're getting 12 times the damage if you roll a 3 or a... What is it? 3 or... If you roll a 2, you're still taking 12 times as much damage as the other guy. So it's just dramatic. The difference between negative and positive modifiers, they're night and day. So never attack when you're going to have a negative modifier, because it will screw you eventually. Because as the player, you are going to constantly be having RNG events. You're constantly going to be attacking. You're constantly going to have to fight someone in, suboptimal circumstances. You're constantly fighting. And if one of those goes sour, it can screw over the entire run. Whereas with the AI, if the AI gets lucky in one battle, it doesn't help the AI that much. It just doesn't. If the AI is fighting the AI and it gets one lucky battle, that's okay, good luck. Good job. But if you get one unlucky battle where you really just screw yourself, there's just nothing you can do about that. You're going to end up losing thousands of troops that shouldn't have died, and it's entirely your fault. It's not the RNG's fault if you do it. So anyway, that's the basic gist of this video, is you can influence the amount that the the amount that RNG impacts you. In most games, you can reduce the actual bad stuff that can happen from from RNG, while maximizing the good stuff that can happen from RNG, right? It's just important that you recognize where the kill switches are, that RNG, you're taking a serious risk if you do something. And it's easy to think, I have dramatically more powerful troops, I can just charge in there and crush these guys. But it turns out that if you go and get yourself stuck in a river all of your guns are jamming because they're all wet, none of your cannons are working, and the other guys are dropping rocks on you from the mountains. It doesn't matter that they're just using rocks. A rock will kill you if it hits you in the head, and you can't fight back. If you can't fight back because none of your guns are working, they're gonna kill you all. And that's the equivalent of rolling a 0 when you're crossing a river into mountains. Is none of your guns are working, and the opponents are in a place where you can't punch them to death. That's the general gist of it. So, in this game, make sure to not let those negative penalties stack. So that's it for this video. Next time I will talk about the other mechanics, how to improve the quality of your army, and how to actually reduce the amount of RNG that you get to an extent. So thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time.